right. Welcome, everybody. Today's panel is about real-world AI and machine learning use cases, specifically in IT and OT SecOps. You'll try to figure out what's working, what's breaking, and what's being quietly dropped. We obviously have one heck of a lineup stacked with people building SOCs, deploying machine learning, and operating at the data and governance layers at their SecOps. Let's kick it off with maybe some quick introductions. I'll leave it up to Tom to start us off with a quick introduction.
Tom Morgan, Darling Ingredients. I'm in charge of the threat intelligence for Darling Ingredients, and I've been here for about 12 years now, so I'm excited to see how threat intelligence and machine learning go together.
Sweet. Great to have you, Tom. Peter, can you take it away?
Yeah, Peter Morin. I'm director at PwC Canada. I lead our OT cyber practice. Involved in quite a bit on the operational side, operationalizing tools and so on and so forth for our various clients. And great to be here.
Sweet. Great to have you, Peter. Kate, all yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Johnson. I'm the Intel director at Dragos doing research. And prior to that, I worked at a utility basically doing SOC work and threat hunting internally. So that is my background.
Sweet. Thank you, Kate. All yours, Ahmed.
Yeah, this is Ahmed. I'm the head of process control and IT engineering in Saudi Aramco gas operations. I'm handling process control, OT cybersecurity, as well as digital transformation programs.
Sweet. Thank you, Ahmed. Dylan, all yours.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Dylan here, co-founder and head of research of a brand new cybersecurity startup. We're actively applying large language models and AI to some of the problems that make detection very, very hard. So nice to meet you.
Sweet. Thank you, Dylan. And last but not least, all yours, George.
Hi, everyone. My name is George Alcora. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Ruby Corp. I work in the online dating space, and I was a military sales intelligence specialist with Canadian Armed Forces prior to my career in cyber. Pleasure to meet you all today.
Sweet. Thank you, George, for joining us. All right, let's give it a quick start with Tom. You've spoken about the need for broader, longer correlation windows, specifically when it comes to threat hunting. I wonder if you can maybe give us some insights on how do you think machine learning can help connect these long tail threats into coherent attack stories?
Sure. Most of the current products, I'm not getting into specifics, basically deal off alerts, bang, something's happening right now. What I tend to look for more in the data stream is long tail threat actors that are going low and slow, maybe take several months up to a year or more to hit us. And I'm using machine learning and AI on top of that to do some reporting, of course, to find the indicators, find the patterns, and bring them out for the long story. I don't really deal in the day-to-day SOC operations. I deal more with who's going to hit us and who may hit us. So
100%.
Definitely in a learning curve along with everybody else, but it's working and I'm excited about it. Some things are working, some things are not.
When it comes to, I guess, detecting these kind of like long tail, low frequency beacons, what are some things that you would like some sort of an automation or machine learning or AI to do? What are the guardrails? What are the foundations of doing something like that?
Well, basically, since we're dealing off of our data, a lot of times we end up taking our data and putting it in a data warehouse. So we have our normal feeds and we have a data warehouse. So I spend most of my time in there in the data lake or warehouse. And it's picking up unique low frequency patterns and grouping them together and correlating them so that I can take a closer look at them. It basically brings out the low noise. It's like if somebody, for example, if you're in a SOC and somebody's just hammering away at you, making a bunch of noise, that's not really what you need to look at. You look for the person that's not doing a lot of noise or distracting you. So I'm trying to find the threat actors in the nation states within the data. So that's machine learning's helped me pick that up and set it aside and then do correlation on top of it.
100%. Kate, can you weigh in? Maybe in your threat research work, do you see maybe in the future machine learning and AI possibly helping uncover these low and slow behaviors?
Yeah, I think right now I see a path and a potential to help uncover some of those low and slow behaviors, but that's generally kind of traditional hunting as well, as looking for those low and slow. And so a lot of the threat actors we're seeing still blend in with normal activity. So they're looking to copy the same low and slow, which right now I'm seeing it just kind of basically at the same level as a regular threat hunt. But I see there's definitely potential in the future to make that like a much better, I think it takes some tuning. And obviously, at the end of the day, a human still has to investigate the findings from these low and slow behaviors, but definitely can highlight. We've seen that help with highlighting some of that.
Anybody here has any experience maybe with like stealthy incidents where the full story only like is revealed maybe weeks after, I guess, the first initial alert? Maybe show of hands.
Do you mean months or weeks?
I was thinking weeks, but if it takes months, it's a lot more juicy.
I would say months, sometimes even a year to really know the full picture. I don't know about other people, but it takes some time to uncover some of that.
What are the main reasons that's the case?
I'm going to speculate and say it's mission. If mission is persistence, and that's what you value over everything else, then it's going to be slow.
But I mean, like, are there like foundational issues with like doing this in less than months?
I think the foundational issues probably stem from visibility, right, and lack of data, right? Understanding your environment, having the right controls in place. We can put all the technology in the world into an environment, but we know if we're not looking at it, it's not doing much. If we're not analyzing the alerts or behavior patterns, it's really not adding value, right? And more and more data, we're collecting more and more data from all these tools. So having to analyze it and actually putting context behind it is probably the toughest part.
Yeah, I think I've heard folks talk about, what's your attack surface a lot, but I think a newer terminology coming out is what's your detection surface. We don't always have visibility or the right visibility into our enterprise's assets. And if you don't have that, you can't generate a signal if someone's on there, right? But sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, just on the low and slow piece of it, one instance of something doesn't indicate something's bad. So it takes that time to put those together that makes it make it bad. Like it's hard to do that over that course of time.
I think another issue we talk about visibility is like visibility in our own environments. We are in an era now where shadow IT and shadow AI is really the most prevalent insider threat problem most organizations face. So, I have to spend a ton of time figuring out what's happening at the endpoint layer to make sure someone, a developer, someone on the design team, something doesn't decide to go and use some open source LLM and start vibe coding on it, start pumping things and starting to put stuff into production, start moving things outside the SDLC's traditional process. You deal with members of the organization who maybe aren't traditionally part of the SDLC. Maybe they are in the UX design. They're like, hey, I want to work in Figma and I want to build this thing up and I vibe coded 70 lines and let's check it out. And you're like, this does not follow any kind of CI/CD standardization at all. So I think the fact that, we're in an era where even our own staff and employees are very empowered and they see all this hyper productivity available to them. But from a security standpoint, we have to bring it back. And us trying to act as the guardrails holding back innovation while preaching business enablement, I think that's a big part of the problem that we face from a security leadership standpoint.
Yeah, I can also say, I can attest to the fact that, on the OT side, there's all kinds of great point products that are out there on the OT side, but what I'm still noticing is that there's still gaps in the assets and understanding what those assets are, and then there's a coverage issue, right? When you look at these products and some of the larger organizations are having to invest millions a year in licensing to put these products out, and then they make decisions on where they want that coverage to be. And, it always ends up being that one area where they don't think there's a lot of risk, where, the attacker tends to kind of lurk and hide in the corner. And that's the area you don't have the visibility over, right? So I think I find a lot of organizations, we do a lot of product, we put a lot of product into organizations. I find a lot of them jump the gun thinking we put a product in, it's good. We can just go to bed now and it's all solved. When there's an operationalization perspective to that, right? So it's that whole OpEx CapEx thing that we've been preaching for the last 20 years, right? It's still there today.
Would love
100%.
to add to that. What Peter mentioned is sometimes in the brownfields it's really hard and it's costly to uncover all the blind spots. So when we implement anomaly detection, AI, machine learning solutions, we try to connect them to the easy network segments, while some older and legacy systems that are hiding behind a serial connection, hiding behind a physical isolated network, which we don't care to connect, or maybe it's not financially sound to connect at this stage, which keeps a lot of visibility issues here and there. And sometimes these are the critical components that we should be looking into.
I mean, I'll give you an example. Like, we work with a lot of power utilities and, modernization of substations, and we'll go into them and they'll say, oh, don't worry about that substation on Main Street. It's still running whole electromechanical stuff. But then we go in there and they've already started putting switches in there, and they're like, well, we have fiber there. We're going to connect that substation in the meantime. So, it's not that there's anything that they can use to tamper with a substation, but there is still connectivity into that substation, but there's no visibility in it, right? So it's a great points there, Ahmed. Really, really good points.
100%. I'm gonna go ahead, Cooper. Sorry.
So I think there's another avenue that we're using for the long tail is that almost every security function, tool, product that we use is also an avenue. So, I mean, we can go back a few years and say SolarWinds, right? But it seems like that if you publish what you use, and I'll give you a kind of a right out of the news, you've got Scattered Spider, who's focused on manufacturing, who uses Okta, right? Well, wasn't that okay, so you start to look at the patterns and how people attack. If you're really taking CTI back into your data, you probably should take it from their point of view. And when you do, you go, these are the people who are going to target me because they're targeting this region, this type of industry that operates these technologies. And some of those technologies, the vast majority of them are the very ones that we're relying on to create the security that they're bypassing. And it's sort of this, how do you find that? If everybody's inside the consoles of the tools looking, how do you find that noise if you're not looking outside of that context? So
100%. No, on that point, I think we gotta definitely reground what is context. We gotta figure out how do we actually put together the right, I guess, data that we call context into essentially the right view at the right time. And I think we do have the tools. For instance, like a lot of us have correlation tools like rules or searches or whatnot. But I guess to Peter's point, we're not really operationalizing them. So maybe on that segue, Peter, what's your approach for building these kind of use cases, if I might call them that, for correlation, especially in OT and IT, whether rules or machine learning or insert whatever technology?
I mean, I going back to what I said earlier. I mean, I think and this was a discussion I had with a colleague just the other day on the managed services side, talking about how fast we can replace our tier one with AI and agentic AI components, right? And I think there's definitely a space there where there's certain components we can rely on AI, but I don't think we're 100% to the point where it's going to have the coverage we think it's going to have. And I do think, again, before we leap into building use cases using machine learning, like there's still that operationalization portion of it, right? Whatever product you're putting into your environment to do detection, there's so much of it that lacks what I refer to as post-installation tuning. So just at a minimum verifying the fidelity of the data that's coming in with regards to your assets. I mean, I'll put a product in, and I won't name products. They all, for the most part, do the same thing. But you come in, and it's only as good as what it understands, right? And if you have environments that are not typical OT environments, for example, if you have an environment that from a manufacturer, and that manufacturer's gone out and had a company build custom OT equipment outside of general PLCs that are very specific to that environment. Well, you can't expect those tools to really understand what they're doing, right? Or if you have very specific areas, like if you're in aviation or transportation or any of these fields where they're very, very niche areas, you can't expect those platforms to just automatically understand everything and be able to automatically classify those assets. But the thought is they do that. So when you're going in there and you're like, oh, look at this, it's identified these 5 Windows boxes, but they're not really Windows boxes. There's some kind of OT component that the platform doesn't understand, right? So I think there has to be a lot of pre-work that has to happen. And then at that point, once you're satisfied that your asset base is right, then you can get into starting to understand on how you can do things like, enrich use cases with machine learning and AI, and you could start to look at integrating things like IT and OT together. So you could start to look at the path of an attacker, coming in through the IT VPN and going through your various Purdue layers till they get to the OT side, as opposed to just seeing it from something has appeared in the OT environment. What is it and why is it there? You need the context of coming through the IT side as well.
100%. I wonder, how do teams that are listening to this action this kind of, like, let's sit down and build the correlation use cases? Like, how do you guide them on something like this?
Do you mean like bringing people together?
Indeed.
To build? Yeah. So that again goes down. That goes back to the whole convergence model, right? So, and whether it's building use cases or just the IT people that go and they buy a product and they're trying to convince the OT people to just put this in your network, it's going to be great. And the OT people are like, I have to build 600 widgets an hour. That's my goal. And I have to make sure that there's no, health and safety incidents, and that, the trucks are getting filled on the other side. You got to get to the point where the product is not an IT product. It's an organizational product. It brings as much value to them as it brings to you. And all these products also serve as really good products in general OT environments, as opposed to just cybersecurity. Going and being able to say to a plant manager, like, I'm going to be able to tell you, like, how many Rockwell PLCs have this firmware on them, so that the next time when you're going to get budget to upgrade your firmware, you're going to know what's there. So you're giving them tools to be able to do that. I've had some clients that have been able to detect outages because of these products that have nothing to do with cybersecurity. So I think, you've got to be able to come in there and build this as more of a team environment, and not convincing the other side that it's good for them, because they're just going to see it as, IT trying to push another product into that environment that they don't quite understand, right? And not that I'm a big committee builder, but trying to bring people together regularly so they can have these discussions as to, what's good for IT and what's good for OT, and it's not just one or the other.
100%. I think on the conversions of IT and OT, there seems to be quite some interesting stories of, I guess, these two kind of teams not working so well together. Anybody around have any tips on how to ensure, I guess, some sort of synergies or some sort of harmony in that kind of fusion of IT and OT? I know the people, process, technology might be the easiest. What do you do when it comes to people and process?
If you allow me, traditionally, SOC and security ops teams are IT oriented, and OT teams are operation oriented. They don't share the same language. They don't share the same knowledge of the operation processes. Yesterday, we had a brief discussion with other cybersecurity experts. There was in the news that Kuwait arrested a guy who was doing crypto mining. It's prohibited there, and they actually saw that in the power monitoring logs. It was not a cybersecurity log. So we need to look into the operation telemetry, which could be a lot. It's a lot, hundreds of thousands of logs of tags of points and try to combine that together with the cybersecurity context, define baseline that represent realistic operation scenarios from startup until shutdown, what's normal, what's abnormal. Maybe we need to define and let the SOC people understand what's a privileged action not from a cybersecurity point of view, privileged action from the control system point of view. So they can understand if something is being done on the control side that could represent a cybersecurity attack. We mentioned in the beginning that some attacks or some threats are discovered way after they are actually in the system. So that's maybe the reason, because we don't share the language, we don't understand what's happening in the OT. Yes, we agree that a lot of the OT daily practices are not considered in line with the IT hygiene. We are using a service account that never expire, their password never expire. We're using sometimes basic passwords. It is normal in the OT, but IT might consider it a risk. But for me, it's normal. So I believe we need to onboard the SOC people into the OT environment and OT people into the SOC. So at the end, eventually we will have an OT SOC that will understand both languages and can detect and have better understanding on the threat cases here.
I'll make.
Yeah, sorry, T, go for it. We're just the same thing. Go for it, bro. Yeah.
So I think I agree with Ahmed there, and I think there's 2 points I wanted to make. I think the OT environment is starting to look more like IT environments in general, right? And I don't think. And I think leveraging the data, like you said, observability, having the telemetry, right? There's different aspects of indicators of a potential compromise that's happening in those environments, right? So merging that data and analyzing the data, again, it's a lot of it, right? Detection engineering kicks in on them. We have leveraged quite a bit of engineering rules that pull from OT and put it into our cyber sim, right? And in the past, right? So those things can overlap and have a lot of good synergies from that side. And I think more and more as the world is evolving, as our infrastructures are evolving, it is becoming more of a fusion center more than anything else, right? Because it's going to look the same, right? You can even push it to as far as physical security, right? It's, joint security operations center is not a foreign concept, right? Those telemetry can port into cyber. One of the things when I worked in the government side, it's air-gapped environments, right? So our cybersecurity protocols were actually physical security protocols. Someone would have to break into the environment to actually compromise those systems. There was like meltdown specter everywhere. Nobody cared because we'd have to catch them physically. Right. And so I think the convergence of that data is becoming more and more critical. There's a lot of data out there, right? And I think back to the AI topic, right? Being able to leverage AI to analyze and understand behavior patterns, cross-connect them. Humans are the only ones that are going to be able to train them, right? And from past behaviors and things and put that context behind it. It's not going to be perfect, but I think as we give it more and more context over time, it is going to start moving towards that direction.
Yeah, and I was saying, like, he was talking about the JSOC or hybrid SOC concept. We both played together, kind of building out this thing, and a couple of years ago, so it kind of sparked up the alarms for us. The way I see it is, as we take more legacy infrastructure, physical infrastructure that was not designed to be internet connected, and then connect it into wired or wireless infrastructure that is internet connected, that's where the risk point is, because it's not built or designed to deal with the data flows and the exposure of being in the open web. And now it's actually a target that's touchable within the vector of compromise. So I think the biggest thing that AI could do to help assist that is likely identifying where those assets are and then helping build mitigation solutions based on what the overall infrastructure protection is, right? So if you have a cyber perimeter security type solution in place, and you're now taking in your SCADA environment, which was designed not to be talking to the internet, now it's talking to the internet. Well, now it has to be part of the perimeter, right? So now it has to be part of basics, your web access firewall. Do you have an egress IP in place? Is there gateway control? Like, the basic fundamental cybersecurity questions now become applicable to those new SCADA environments. And so the AI comes in not only on a technical detection level, but when you're looking at compliance, right? Because there's mandated industries that have very heavy government legislation to make sure that they can function. You have to check off on those compliance issues as you then integrate those environments. So I think the problem is a lot more complex than we can talk about in a short session, and the solutions are also a little bit more complex, but the AI is useful because it streamlines the multifaceted approach you have to take. Where we are now going to see the biggest challenge is legal, like the law, our legislative mandates, our compliance obligations, and our policies all have to actually be in line and in compliance to what is physically happening in the operation. Before, you can kind of get away with a little bit of a gray area where, a couple controls might be soft here or there. You might not consider it to be like, hey, it's not the end of the world if we get a couple of NCFs on our audit. But nowadays, you can use the AI to determine where those points are. And with a lot of the new AI-enabled data security solutions, you can even now look at structured and unstructured data to determine where there are their various points for compromise or for metadata to be pulled to be turned against you. So I think it's a really, really fun topic. T and I both get very excited about it, but I think it's actually still the future of where security is going, is that converged physical network security kind of apparatus.
Totally agree.
George, I think you got a question from Kate.
I don't know if it's going to be more of a comment than a question. I know it sounds terrible. Just kind of following on with that physical aspect and recognizing your physical controls. I think something that people often miss are the logs for your PACS, systems. Like, are people badging in? Or are they not? Is this solely a thing connected via the telemetry and the communication on the wire versus someone physically there? And that sort of insight even correlated with maybe change management. Like, was this a planned thing that we're trying to do, or is it something that's happening? And I'm not sure how many people are actually correlating that into their, network activity monitoring that they do.
I think it does bring in a lot more challenges, right? Depending on where those physical security controls are placed. Sometimes you inherit it. The building you're in, the building management system has it, right? So having interoperability between technologies and pulling those telemetry in a more unified fashion, I think that's going to be the toughest challenge.
100%. Peter, go for it.
I'll add one last comment, just going back to the whole IT OT convergence where we started off, is that one of the other things I was just thinking about this, one of the other areas that kind of comes into play too with larger utilities, power utilities, for example, is the whole NERC side of things, the NERC SIP side of things, where it's not always really easy to be able to combine your IT and our OT data. In a lot of cases, we have to enclave the OT data because it is considered NERC SIP compliant, and that brings in a lot of issues in a lot of cases, trying to basically pull the data out to correlate it with our IT data. So there, hopefully things like that are going to kind of start to unravel a little bit more, and we'll have a little bit more access to that data. But it is something that I know on the utility side we have to think about.
Fantastic. I think my understanding is we need to ensure that we have, we seem to all agree that we need to make sure that we are correlating IT and OT data, ideally correlating all kinds of data. And we seem to know that we need to kind of sit down and build the use cases, regardless of what technology is going to do the correlation. Because we got to make sure that we know what kind of correlation we need. On that segue, maybe Mike, thank you for joining us. Maybe give us a quick introduction, and maybe right after, tell us a little bit about this kind of shiny toy syndrome with all the AI and marketing buzz around us. And maybe how can teams focus on these kind of fundamentals, like correlation use cases, and essentially what kind of data should come together, and bringing the IT and OT teams together for better conversion instead of just jumping into the newest, coolest AI technology out there.
Sure, and I appreciate the the questions. And yeah, I'm Mike Holcomb. I'm the fellow for cybersecurity for Fluor. We're one of the largest engineering companies in the world, so we get to design and build some of the largest OT ICS environments out there. And I lead the cybersecurity practice on the control systems side. yeah, you definitely see, I think any environment, and this is OT, this is IT, you get executives and leaders particularly, and we're probably all guilty of it in some respect of getting shiny toy syndrome and looking to see the latest and greatest solution that you can buy off the shelf and throw it in your environment, and a lot of these can often be sold as silver bullets to solve all of your security concerns, and probably nobody here is going to argue that those just typically don't exist. And I think especially in OT and control system environments, you see a lot of environments that have very, very limited budgets. And for them to go chasing after one of these shiny toys is very unfortunate, because they really need to first invest the resources in the fundamentals of securing the environment, right? Secure network architecture, backup and recovery, continuous vulnerability management, let alone we can talk about things like network security monitoring, which the vast majority of OT environments just don't do today. And a lot of that comes down to cost. But you can defend these environments, and you can do it by just implementing the basics and have a very strong program. That's one of the nice things about OT cybersecurity, I think, that a lot of people don't realize. So you can defend these environments without any of the shiny toys. Now, if you have a more mature organization, and I get to work with some of the largest organizations in the world that have plenty of resources and they invest them into securing their environments, that's great. And you can start looking at those solutions. And then when you have those resources and you are able to look at those solutions, then you really need to get in and kick the tires, pull up the hood, look inside to really see when somebody's talking about AI, machine learning, what they're actually doing, what they're trying to accomplish. Is it something that they actually are accomplishing, and or not? I think there's still a lot of solutions out there today that are smoke and mirrors, unfortunately. So,
100%. So it seems like there is really missing visibility on the OT side. Is that the case?
yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it comes down to just the costs that are associated. Probably at Dragos, Kate's boss, talks about, he's been highlighting probably for the last 2 years, just from what he's seen. And if anybody who's seen, pretty much everything out there, it's raw that, about 5% of OT organizations are performing network security monitoring today. And I would say even probably half of those aren't doing a good job, right? So there is a strong lack of visibility, which really, again, I think there's 2 points there. One is, it's just because of cost, right? The majority of OT organizations, right, they don't have one person for OT cybersecurity, let alone IT cybersecurity, let alone somebody to sit at a SIM monitoring for alerts and being able to respond, right? Sad but true. And at the same time, when you think of, well, we're only seeing like maybe 5% of the environments out there, and then when you hear of the news of like a Volt typhoon or all the different incidents, like that's from just seeing 5% of the environments out there. So it is, I think, eye-opening or concerning at least to
100%.
start to think, what else is out there in the 95% of environments that we're not looking at.
100%. Mike, you rallied the crowd. You got at least 4 hands. Go for it. I think Ahmed.
Yeah, thank
can
you,
take it
Mike,
away.
for highlighting this. It's really a challenge especially when you go and try to convince the decision makers to give you the financial support to purchase one of those shiny toys, because every 1 or 2 or 3 years you'll come to the decision makers asking for a fund for a new technology, AI, machine learning, and they will tell you, aren't we secure enough? I can give the same amount of money to the mechanical reliability team. They will upgrade a compressor that will make money for me, but you are just asking for money that will not make any revenue, no return on investment, negative net present value. So that's one of the challenges for cybersecurity teams when it comes to the cost.
Absolutely. And one thing that I love about OT, right, that you don't have, there's an advantage there that you don't have in IT. Because in OT, like when I talk and pitch SIMs, and like I don't try to actually sell customers necessarily on SIMs per se, or particular ones, right, but that they should be doing monitoring and helping them understand that fact. And I don't pitch them on the security that SIM brings. I focus on it helps you from an operational availability perspective. Right? And then it's really a win-win. So yeah, we get security from implementing SIM tools, but really, hey, you think I have a central platform where I can look for events, that if I find events or suspicious activity, that I can respond to those alerts and find issues in the environment that would eventually lead to some type of operational issue, and we can address that before something actually bad happens that impacts the plant. That's a win-win. So I always sell it as, yeah, it helps you with availability, and sure, could it catch an attacker in the environment? Sure, that's great, but at the end of the day, it actually helps you keep the plant up and running and keeping everybody safe.
What a
Yeah,
great point.
and Michael, along those lines, right? On the OT side, I've noticed from the manufacturing aspect of it, sometimes I will question: do we need an OT security team, right? Because if
Right.
it's a destructive attack, it's the operational availability, right? I've seen engineers rip out a machine, put in a new one with faster than we could remove the malware or the ransomware, right? Because they need to keep operations going. So what is really important on the OT side is the availability. But I think from a cybersecurity perspective, I think it's the data security. Is the IP on that machine is being stolen, right? And I think that's where the IT and OT works best. We guardrail the OT environment where I think the engineers themselves kind of also keep themselves alive because their job is to keep the machine running and producing money, right? And so that's where I think it's a fine balance of collaboration and understanding. I think the way you put it was great, is selling the SIM as an observability tool, right? Because they can leverage that data for more efficiencies, manage their supply chain, and manage their resources for operating, right? So I want to make a point on that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think it makes me think of, every environment's different, right? Everybody has unique needs. I've worked in every size of every environment, just about every type. I don't do water, but just about everything else. And yeah, a lot of environment, right? If I'm manufacturing baseballs, yeah, I'm not worried about if somebody like steals my proprietary information, right? It just doesn't factor in. In the day job, we build nuclear weapons for the United States. That's obviously like the whole other end of the spectrum, and then you have everything in between. So I think the majority of OT environments that are out there, they're small, medium-sized. Most don't have those concerns around confidentiality and protecting their IP. They just want to make sure that the plant stays up and running and we're churning out baseballs.
Yep.
Great point about the, I guess, CIA triad going the other way. You got a couple more questions. Go for it, Kate.
I think Peter might have been ahead of me. I'm not sure.
Oh, all right.
I'm a little freaking with my finger on the button there. I don't know why. I just wanted to, Mike, great comments on the dollar side of it. It was funny. I came up with a discussion the other day with a client that, as we know, these NSM products, the way they work is span ports and taps and all those things, right? And the client came back and we looked at their entire network, and they had about 6,000 switches. And when we looked at even looking at aggregation and things like that, and putting sensors out and so on and so forth, the dollar amount they said, put in this product is more than my budget for cybersecurity and OT in general.
Sure.
And then the question came back, well, can we put it in parts of the network, and the discussion of like, what's good enough in terms of, coverage. So it is like, like these products are great, but in a lot of cases, like these environments are just so big that, trying to find the money to be able to fund these products. Then once you have it in there, like I mentioned earlier, there's cost operationalizing it, right? So,
Absolutely.
that's a really good point, Mike.
Yeah, I see a lot of, I mean, that's very common. And yeah, it's especially in larger environments, but it's just like that economies of scale where it just depends on the environment that you go into and where they can invest in. And it also goes back to, Easy's original question about focusing on the fundamentals. And, you mentioned, what's good enough. I always cringe when I hear that, but I get, I also, get the idea that, well, what can we implement today that we can afford and then build from there over time? At least that's how I interpret it. And so there are a lot of those fundamentals we can do where I see a lot of shops that they're just not even, looking at their firewalls and seeing what's happening in the firewalls, right? Not only what's being allowed through the firewall between IT, OT, or between internal segments within OT, but also what's being blocked. I mean, I've actually found state adversaries in environments simply by looking for blocked traffic, believe it or not. So you don't have to have a true, an advanced type of system to be able to find attackers in the environment. Yeah, if you have the money, if you have the resources at that point to start implementing, that is awesome, right? And good for those environments for being able to take a step. But I do wish we saw, more environments that just weren't at that maturity level yet to, again, take some of those basic fundamental steps, like looking at firewall traffic to see what's going on in the environment before
there definitely is value in the north-south traffic. Like you mentioned, command and control that's in an OT environment that is being blocked, but it is still means that you have a machine that's compromised trying to do command and control, right? So
yeah, absolutely. That's going back to Dragos, the Dragos year in review report. I read that every year when it comes out, right? And they're sure talking as like 40% of environments and OT environments that they looked at had active SSH connections out to the internet. I mean, oh, if that doesn't make you want to be sick,
That cannot be good.
Yeah.
I think you got a question from Cooper. All yours, Cooper.
So I just more of a comment along this lines is that the edge will tell you more than you ever thought it would tell you if you just listen. Tell you what your adversary is. It'll tell you. And let's just take it from a compliance perspective. Many times we're trying to show that our controls are effective. If you have the mythical air gap in OT, then why is that box going to Google? And that's on your edge, right? So you can simply route an AI to go, will you tell me where my compliance rules on these critical networks aren't enforced? You'd be surprised the answers you get in the logs that it produces. Right. So instead of a whole bunch of artifacts and work and a bunch of surveys and network scans, how about you just look at the edge and look backwards and ask that same question?
Yeah, no, and that's another. I had just done one of those like little mini projects for the SANS ICS Summit talk that we had about a month ago, and one of it was just using ChatGPT to create a script to review firewall logs. Right, it could be 2 gigs of logs, it could be 20 kilobytes of log. Go through these logs and let me know if you find any public IP addresses. Right, that's like super simple and yet super effective, right? Because that's one thing you should not see, in at that edge or in those firewall logs at all.
100%. Okay, go for it. I know you had your hand up for a
Yeah,
while.
sorry. I also messed with putting it up versus taking it down. So apologies on that. But I feel like intertwined in all of this conversation of, what's shiny, what should we be chasing, where should we have visibility, how do we get budget for it? I'm biased here, so this is take it with a grain of salt, but I really feel like that's where CTI can help with that prioritization, help with that focus, help prove that case for you. And where it's not doing that, it's like, well, that's something that needs to be worked on as well. But being able to see where that activity is happening in other places and show that's where you should have visibility, I think is really key, and hopefully helps people focus their, shiny, I don't know what the word is there, but just be able to stay focused and not constantly be looking at different things and not know where the visibility needs to be because it's focused. That was my 2 cents there.
I guess
Yeah, no, great point.
100%. I guess on that segue, maybe Kate, you can tell us a little bit about, from your expertise in threat intel and threat hunting, what are some of these use cases where you think machine learning and AI can really help? Possibly like use cases where it's really boring or like really impossible for humans to do, or like something that's simple, like generating a script or something like that.
Definitely on like the boring side, probably the reading and writing portions of intelligence. I think not a lot of people have time to read things. So if you could pump a bunch of data, a bunch of reports, external reports, internal reports, whatever, into the system and have it summarized, I think it does a really great job of that and highlighting what that data should be that you should care about. I think on the more fun side, it can help with like developing hypothesis generation, anything like that with like, I mean, that starts to take some of the fun out of the job. So it's kind of up to whoever wants to do that. On the impossible side, really, I think it's just that identifying patterns similar to, I think Tom had mentioned that earlier. I don't see him on here now. Just around highlighting in large data sets what that low and slow behavior could look like. I think where we run into problems or where it becomes specific data. Like I think humans do a better job of identifying patterns in bits and bytes or in strings than I think I see AI doing. I think most of it's like a best guess. So I think where the boring is probably the most useful, like Mike had just mentioned, of develop a script that does a thing. Like if you're just trying to get the syntax right, I think it does a pretty good job of creating a query or anything like that. But when it, some of the patterns it may be doing some best guess on, and especially for when it comes down to like very specific strings, whether it's something that should stand out versus not, I think it has some challenges.
100%. Do you see any other maybe areas where it can fit in other than like taking big corpuses of like data and then maybe mining stuff out of it, or maybe generating like reports or write-ups, or possibly maybe helping generate hypotheses? Do you see any other use cases?
I mean, I think those are the easiest to get a hold of. I think when you start getting
100%.
into more developed, it needs to be really well tuned. Like, are you building your own model or are you using a model in another product? And I think that's not everybody has the resources to take that model side on. They're hoping that the products that they purchase can do that for them. And tuning is a really big part of that. And so definitely, I think in the future, it'll be a lot better as people develop these standard models that can help. But I think that's still pretty green and people haven't figured out the best models for the OT space quite yet, but definitely has a potential in the future, I think, outside of the, report writing. Yeah.
100%. Tom, go for it.
Yeah, I would say one of the use cases that I found in looking for the anomalies in the large data lake is coming up with a threat hunting hypothesis to run one and then try to vet it. And then if it looks like it may be something we want to pursue, to turn it back over to our threat hunters. So it's kind of a side job for, boy, this is weird. Let's identify that and then see if it vets out and then turn it over to the threat hunters.
I know, Tom, you also touched upon the point of guardrailing AI in our previous discussions. Like you like how like structured AI, like for instance, like encoding AIs or whatnot, like they're very guardrailed. Like they tell you like, I'm going to do this, what do you think? And they give you checkpoints. Do you see that as like something that is probably in the future of these kind of like threat hunting AIs?
I think so too. And even on the coding ones, you have to very specifically define what you want the coding to do, or it'll go decide to do some interesting code. Same thing with threatening. Yes, I think if you establish the guardrails of what you want the AI to do or the machine learning to do and do a feedback loop as you go through and train it, then definitely it has capability. But as Kate mentioned earlier, I don't know that people necessarily have the time or bandwidth or inclination to go through that process. You end up with a whole lot of, that's weird, well, that's a false positive. And I think most commercial products, because they are commercial products, tend to avoid false positives, where if you do this type of methodology, you're going to come up with quite a few false positives before you generate something useful.
100%. I wonder if maybe, Kate, do you use like some sort of like a foundation or like maybe some sort of like a prompt structure to get what you want out of this AI? Like, do you give it like some sort of guardrails?
I mean, I think you have to give it guardrails. I don't have like a go-to guardrail. We kind of have different ones for what we do for detections, for what we do for hunting. Obviously, the data has to be well designed and structured to begin with. And thankfully, the data set I've got is already tagged to do that. So yeah, I don't think I have like a go-to, this is the best prompt or thing to put in to get the thing I want. I feel like I have to futz with it every time. And, you know, and because I don't work with one customer, it's, you know, an aggregate of all the customers that I'm working with, which may be different than some of the other people's experience. I don't have like something that just works for everybody, which is unfortunate.
100%. I think a great point on the data quality, like garbage in, garbage out kind of situation. Maybe on that segue, we'll maybe ask maybe Cooper. Cooper, do you currently know maybe what's a good way to tell if machine learning is actually giving you like real value? Or, you know, like, you know how ChatGPT would like lie to you very confidently? It would just give you like all of this false confidence. It would be like, yes, 100%, 2 + 2 is equal 500.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's
100%.
It's a challenge because the best way that we've learned to do it is, one, you have to stop being a security practitioner that you were yesterday. You have to open up your head to another way of thinking. And I'll tell a story that said we asked basically an unstructured AI that we were working with to look at all of our data, and we asked a simple question: can you see if we're under attack from an AI? It's just a weird question. You know, these weird questions you ask AI on your data set, and it came back and said, yeah, I think so on these devices. We looked at it and go, no, that's us. That's our agent. That's our MDR services agent. That's false positive. And I went, wait, there's thousands of systemic things going on in the environment, and it identified all the true AIs. That's a different way of, you got to stop thinking about your threat hunt, false positive, start thinking about, did I just create a detection for AI use in my environment? And then you take that and go, okay, so take that same approach against attribution. And attribution is an art form, just like identifying what's a system versus a programmatic AI, right? And that same amount of grab all that data and have that non-intuitive insight, you have to be open for it first, and you have to not just dismiss it. It means that you need to start from the opposite direction. And what I mean by that is, we talked earlier about look at your edge. How many edge tools don't attribute? How many known IOCs, the things that every tool you pay to do for you, isn't automatically giving you that information so that you can come back and look at, how do we break that apart to TTP, not IOC? How do I understand what they're trying to do and why? And then you start asking those questions in that data set. You start comparing them against like the MITRE framework. You compare them against things that are coming out of CTI, and you start to enrich that data as you go with that back and forth question. And it's an inside joke that our little homemade AIs are interns. And if you take the first answer you intern, you probably need to go back and go, hey, wait, that's great. Can page 4, page 5, that's the wrong way, go do this. And as you go along and you work with that, you get a better level of attribution. They'll even answer those really hard questions like, how do I know if I'm getting a 0-day attack? Right? And so but you have to be open to the answer. It's not a binary answer. The answer may be, whoa, I love what you did here. Can you elaborate there? And that is not an intuitive thing for a typical threat hunter, for a typical SOC, or even an OT operator, right? Because they're used to the binary answer, and this gray piece is something that has to be done with an open mind. And again, attribution is an art form, not a yes, no. It's always in levels of certainty. I hope that answered the question.
100%. Great point about that kind of data quality and like always making sure that the data is somehow like normalized, enriched, and make sure that it's high quality for downstream analysis. Okay, you got a question or a comment?
Yeah, it's just kind of a follow on to what Cooper was saying. Like, you might ask it this question, it may seem out there, and you got to be open to it, which I think can lead you down some really great paths, but can also confidently lead you down just a terrible path that you're like, wait a second, I've gone too far this way. This is not, I mean, you want to definitely be open, yeah, but you gotta like also, because you know the quality, it's not necessarily accurate. But it still can open up your mind and give you ideas and things that can push you towards, okay, what would it take to become accurate? But just added steps, you know?
Can I make a comment to that? You know, we used to call it Google food. Google can take you down a rabbit hole unless you have food that lets you get you where you want to go, right? But this is very, very similar. And so you're really looking for the person who has AI food and can get you there before taking the rabbit hole. But I agree totally.
The one thing that's interesting, and I use ChatGPT mostly, and the interesting thing is it does its own AI food for you these days. So the latest version actually makes suggestions. So let's say, like, I build a lot of tools in ChatGPT, and it'll say, okay, here's a tool, here's a simple port scanner, let's say, and then it'll say, oh, do you want to add things like banner grabbing? Do you want to add, parallelism so you run this faster? I mean, it'll actually help you do a lot of that, for you, which I find absolutely fascinating these days.
On the same token, though, Mike, I've had this situation where it does suggest something, and you say yes, and then it regenerates, but it forgets half of the things it had in the previous version. So you're like, how come it's half the size all of a sudden, right? And then you get into this whole discussion with the AI, like, okay, what about the things? And they're like, oh yes, I'm sorry, I did forget that. And
So
like,
just a side note, one of the questions I always ask AI during programming is, read the project plan. Does this answer the objectives of the project plan before you regenerate? And I'll go, half the time I go, oh, you're right, I should do this instead. Not a huge fan of, as somebody mentioned, vibe coding, but it has its place as long as you work with it.
Absolutely. And it's come a long way in even the last 3 months, but the last 6 months, and where we're going to be in a year, I mean, it'll be crazy.
So Michael, we internally say that the first round we asked was the son or daughter, and you asked if they cleaned the room, and they said yes. He went and looked, and they didn't. And then 2 months later, it's the high school version of that where they're getting better. And then 6 months later, it's the college version. Now, we're still waiting for the professor and the expert to come out, but we see this constant improvement of, okay, less having to go back and check up on the kids, more along the lines of trust what they say. So it's weird analogies, I know, but as we talk internally, go, well, was that the intern agent or was that the college agent, right? We really kind of want to understand what it is, but
yeah, no, that works.
100%. On that point of knowing when it's an intern or when it's a college level, maybe T, you can give us a little bit more on how do you train these, I guess, junior people in your organization that wouldn't really know when AI is hallucinating. They wouldn't really know when AI is going off the plan or the correct path, especially when it always sounds really, really confident.
Yeah, I think it comes to education. One, maybe keep them away from the AI in the first place, right? And that's a true comment, right? We want to. There's hallucinations. You need to validate everything we do. Like, I don't know, back in my day, like getting code from code repos online, right? And just copying and pasting the code wouldn't work, right? You have to validate and make it work and things like that. So for junior folks, I think doing the foundational fundamental work to understand what they're asking AI to do and what the result expected outcome could it is very important. I think AI itself from the security world is a great tool. It aids in a lot of analysis. It aids move things faster, but you need to have the foundational knowledge and understanding of what's going on. What are you asking? If you don't have the security basics, it's not going to tell you how to do security, right? And you can't just go ask an AI make me secure, right? I think education is key. Making sure that they understand what they're using it for, making sure they understand that it is a tool end of the day, right? Cooper mentioned Google, right? Google was our analyst's best friend, right? If I didn't know what variable in a packet, what it looked like, I just Google it, right? And that's how we kind of learn. So also fostering that knowledge and learning mindset where you're always learning and understanding what you're actually getting out of it, because you can't just, it's not going to give you the answer, right? But it's for you to think critically, right? And analyze that information. So I think fostering that for junior folks is very important. Yeah, let them play with it, but I think validation is always key, and having that oversight.
100%. George, you got a question?
No, it's more of a building on T's point. I think in terms of AI implications on professional development, especially folks at the entry level into our field, I've had quite a few conversations like on the podcast and just with other peers about this. The issue is, if you look at consulting and how billable rates are actually created, right? It's about the ability to perform and create outputs within a fixed amount of time of a certain quality and level, and that would determine what your billable rate is, right? So in theory, someone who is really, you're paying like $70K a year could be working as a junior under a senior partner who's making like, $200K a year. And so the client's getting billed at a certain rate, the junior's delivering the actual work because they're using whatever the AI engine is to produce the most of it, right? I think that game is eventually going to go, it's going to get regulated back to normal. Like a lot of client organizations are going to realize like, hey, you guys can deliver a lot more for us a lot more efficiently because of these tools. We're not going to pay you the same way because there's been a little bit of an inflationary bubble that's been created in terms of value for consulting. I think a lot of people who see vibe coding and who see kind of AI as a path to get into more technical roles, it is, but it's not from a professional standpoint, in my opinion. It goes back to the basics. If they don't spend time, if it's security operations we're talking about, if they don't spend time on Wireshark, if they don't spend time doing packet analysis, like manual packet analysis, if they don't spend time doing network diagrams and understanding how a network is built, how data flows between different components, what is an S3 bucket, what is the perimeter, what is the human layer, what's the OSI model, what are these things? If they don't understand the basic core concepts and they can't actually handle incident by themselves, their ability to effectively use AI to enable their work is going to be completely destroyed because they're not going to understand what it is they're trying to do. It's the same thing like when if you ask for a report, someone produces for you an AI piece of garbage. It's like, okay, there are words on a paper, but that's not actually what I wanted. You are missing the context for me as the end product client. You can take this from a threat intelligence perspective. You can take this from operations. If we don't actually teach the basic fundamentals of the job first and then build AI around it, we're literally I think we're just going to produce an industry that's not going to be able to deliver what it needs to.
100%. I wonder if maybe this is a good, point to switch us over into when you look at AI in terms of actually deploying it. I guess everybody is kind of seeing where AI fits well and how we need the right foundations, need the right data. But when it comes to actually deploying something like this, do you look at like maybe the risks that go into using AI tools? Like for instance, like nowadays, most of the AI is hosted somewhere else because of the incredible compute that comes with it. No one is really going to give you like an AI to deploy on-prem, maybe machine learning, but AI is really, really expensive to deploy on-prem. How do you look at this kind of operationalization of AI in the enterprise? Is it essentially going to be the biggest data transfer, I guess, wave of this century?
I can maybe speak to from like a security technology perspective. The technology themselves are having these things built into it, right? The compute power is already with the platforms, right? The platformization of security that's been happening in the last few years, right? Those platforms are coming with more and more enabled features. I think leveraging those as a tool starts off with the good side of it. Then the next aspect of it is if you're deploying and employing your own models, I think it becomes a question of data security in general, right? How do you handle your data? What's going in there? The security tools are already in our environment, right? So we don't have to deal with that. But if you're trying to see if you're going to use somebody else's compute versus your own, that's something you need to kind of consider of where does your data risk appetite stand?
100%. How do you see it, George? I know from your experience, you've looked at multiple AI tools and you've considered a lot of different, I guess, use cases for them. Whenever it comes to actually deploying it, do you ever see any, I guess, way around utilizing the GPUs that are sitting in a data center completely outside of your organization?
I mean, where I would look, honestly, and how I've kind of dealt with the AI problem at my organizations is it's not about the particular LLM, right? Because all the big cloud providers have their own native LLMs, and there are a bunch of other really good enterprise shops out there. It's about how are you hosting it and how are you architecting the infrastructure for it. Because at the end of the day, you have to protect the model, so you have to protect access to that model. You have to protect where the data gets outputted. You have to protect who can access the output data. And then you have to actually look at the integrity of the operation. So my kind of solution to it, full disclosure, like my day job is an AWS shop. AWS has Bedrock, right? Really good AI tool suite. They have QDev. They have a whole bunch of really other awesome AI tools and LLMs that we can then put into our own environment in a segregated manner where we can conduct the actual build operations using AI and then put it through a proper code review process like any other SDLC. And I think, again, that's the hybrid approach of we look at the infrastructure layer problem, we prevent or try to mitigate risk before we ever implement anything by creating as much segmentation as possible. And then we ensure that there's standardized process when we go through and before we put any of the outputs into production. I know that's not like a super sexy answer, but that is the safest approach I've had. And that's how I've been able to securely enable AI operations across all different segments from design to development in my shop.
That's amazing. I think you have a few hands up. Cooper, go for it.
So I think the question you asked is this question we're already being asked by the business on its other AIs. So we're, as security practitioners, I'm pretty sure all of us have been able to go back to the business and go, how do I safely run AI? And if we're not eating that dog food ourselves, right, then at this point we're probably the problem. We're probably our own shadow IT. So if we're doing it and we're using it, then we need to be doing it in the same secure manner that we've advised others, in the same containers, in the same zones, the same everything. So we need to practice what it is that we're preaching in this case.
Yeah.
100%.
Generally speaking, about AI in the OT domain, in Saudi Arabia and other GCC countries, it's mandated to have a data diet and air gap all the OT environment. So AI, be it in a cybersecurity or operational AI, like predictive emissions and predictive maintenance and so on, there are two scenarios. Either we ship the data into the corporate cloud and they do the analytics, and that's only an advisory role of AI. However, now we see that some solutions are implemented on the edge of the OT, so they can be wired back into the control system in order to take action, and they are the next step more than the advisory. So it depends on the regulations, it depends on the air gapping requirements, and for sure, bigger models cannot be done effectively on the edge, especially when you are talking about a company that has many substations, many gas plants, many oil fields. It will be not cost effective to do that.
100%. I think that ties back into Peter's point about know exactly what you're doing first and then make the AI as small or as little as possible for that specific use case. Or make the rules work for that use case, whatever it is, build the use case first, build the foundations first, as Mike was also saying, and then figure out what tools would help you get that use case done. Kate, go ahead. What are your 2 cents?
I got a question this time, and it's kind of for everybody, but it's based on what Ahmed just said, around like, would you trust AI to take action on anything in OT? I mean, I guess same for IT. I'd be interested if the answer was true, but mostly for the OT side.
Trust the
Not
intern?
yet. No.
Not yet.
Well, let me add on to what Kate's saying. Go back 10 years ago when IPS came out and replaced an IDS. How many people here replaced their IDSs with an IPS and let that IPS update their firewall rules on their own? It's essentially the same thing. It's just a little less intelligent. But we got to that point where we were allowing it to do that. You know, and there's so many products out there today that, you know, it'll let, you know, your NSM will make a decision and it can integrate with a firewall and do that too. So the difference is, do we want to trust rules or do we want to trust, you know, AI and machine learning to make that decision, right?
Even if we look into the malware protection solutions, some of the OEMs, OT OEMs will tell you that you shouldn't let them do the cleaning. You should just let them do the alerting. So I don't think we have built enough trust for the AI to take control.
Well, nobody here on the call. We've all made these comments about, you know, the experiences we've had with things like ChatGPT, where, you know, it's you know, I asked it the other day. There was some product that I had never seen before, and I said, you know, can you develop a quick guide on this product? And it said sure. And it developed this guide. It was like, thanks, great. And then I looked at it, and it was like simple things like, you know, I'm in the GUI of this product, and you're supposed to go to, like, you know, settings, assets, configuration. It didn't even know. It was saying, oh, go to administration, configuration. It didn't even know the names of the right areas to go to. And then, you know, I was getting frustrated, and of course, you know, when we all get frustrated, you fight with the ChatGPT. So of course, at that point, I said, you have no idea what you're talking about. There's no such menu called assets. And it was like, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. There is no menu called assets. I'm like, well, why'd you tell me that in the first? And I sit back and I'm like, I'm arguing with the AI at this point. This is not constructive in any way.
And it's like, I'm sorry, I had a hard day. You don't love me anymore.
Kate, I have a kind of a roundabout answer to that, and it's for every tool that's automated. So when it has success, proven success, and so it goes back to why are we underfunded? Because we can't prove that it's happening. Well, how do we get the right tools? Well, it's kind of this circular logic that we get into. We do that against automation. So do you have a problem with your mail filtering out bad mail? Why? Because it's successful and it's always noisy, right? So the day that we start proving that, as soon as we start having bad attacks and they're common and they're doing this and they're in that environment, I guarantee you automation will come. Until then, it's still we got to prove the risk exists in order to get the tool, in order to get the automation. It's the circular logic thing that happens there. So yeah, when the tool finds bad guys, we get investments. When those investments prove that we stop something, we get automation. That's how it happens. So
100%. Great point. Maybe on that segue, we're kind of roasting AI a little, but there are really good use cases for AI, and I know Dylan can really weigh in on this one. So maybe Dylan, can you give us your 2 cents on where do you see LLMs actually adding value? You know, like we talked about generation, so generating queries. We talked about enrichment. We talked about like summarization and reporting and whatnot. Where do you think they actually add value, and how do you fully operationalize them for enterprises?
Yeah, sure. I guess in a nutshell, what we found is that, you know, I try to remind people that this whole Gen AI wave, it's generative AI. That's what they were built to do. They're large language models that, you know, they're very good at generating natural language text, right? But in that line, you know, Kate's touched upon it. This is a great use case for any large volume research. So I think that's a really good one. You know, I think it's really the use cases for security operations are so interesting because they're so multidisciplinary, right? You know, it's not as simple as you just have to understand how to use a SIM. You have to understand all the different types of log sources. How does the SIM work? You have to know a SIM specific query language. You might have to know several of those languages, right? So I think this is a really interesting place for this. But the way we think about it is it's really democratizing expertise, right? You might have somebody who used to be a Linux sysadmin, and so now they're a security practitioner. They're really good at reverse engineering, you know, compromises on Linux systems. It's not so trivial to take that same expertise and apply it to cloud or cloud native, right? So with this burst of technology, you kind of have to be an expert in the logs. You got to be an expert in the adversary's tradecraft. You got to be an expert in the tooling that you use too, right? And nowadays with tool sprawl, these SecOps teams have so many different tools they use to do their job, right? It's not just a SIM if you're lucky or a security data lake. You have a DLP, you have your edge detection products, right? So really we look at it as where are those places where there's the most friction in your team, and you can use LLMs as a force multiplier for that. So yeah, one of the most common ones we see is distilling threat research, right? A few folks touched on the threat ideation piece. Threat modeling, I think, is really interesting too. But what we found is to operationalize this accurately. You know, we've talked about you know, using ChatGPT, and I think the biggest wake up moment, and Cooper touched upon this, is you know, kind of treating it like a junior engineer or an intern almost. And we know that going back and forth 30, 40 times with ChatGPT or Claude, we finally get that right answer. If you think about what we did, it all comes down to we provided more context, right? So really, you know, kind of our rule of thumb when we're building these systems, whether it's agents or large language models, is making the implicit explicit, right? And my favorite way to do this is just go talk to your coworker, right? If you get frustrated when you're using this tech, the odds are, you know, it's probably you just didn't provide the right context, right? And you'll hear this a lot, like the developers at Anthropic talk about, you know, putting yourself in the large language model or the agent's shoes, and almost like every time you do the next step, you erase your memory. It's only what you see in front of you, right? But yeah, this is what makes it such a great candidate for SecOps. You know, writing queries, you know, treat it like coding. There's different coding languages, right? Large language models are really good at generating that. The research one, you know, obviously taking large amounts of unstructured data and pulling insights from it, right? We've even gotten to a point where these models are just as good or better as state-of-the-art OCR systems, right? So it's pretty crazy, but those are just a few.
100%.
Yeah.
When you talk about contextualizing the data before giving it to them, is that like some sort of like a RAG or like vector search or something? Like, what do you do to give the LLMs, I guess, the right context?
Yeah, we really treat it as one type of a problem, and it's a retrieval problem. So, you know, a really basic version is we ask a question in a prompt in natural language, or it could be multimodal like a picture. It goes to be inferenced by the large language model, and it gives you stuff back. You know, you can really put whatever you want. Think about the stuff of I'm making a decision on whether an alert's benign or not. What are all the ingredients or information I use to make that decision? You could go get it from a tool, could be an external system, just a normal database, right? We don't even have to use vectors or embeddings or any of that fancy stuff yet. But yeah, we really put this all under the umbrella of prompt engineering. I put RAG under there too, but it's really just to try to find those things that and a lot of times it's in tribal knowledge, it's in people's heads, right? This is why I go back to talk to your coworkers. And some folks have talked about, I think it was Tom, about having a project plan, or, you know, people who use Cursor, that agentic ID, they popularized this idea of like a rules file, but it's kind of this reusable template that you can add to over time. That's kind of where we get the tribal knowledge out of the team to put down. But I found that's a pretty good proxy for doing a lot of that context engineering. And that definitely gets you a lot more, you know, not a one size fits all result when you're using this. Yeah.
I love how you called it context engineering. Essentially, what Peter was talking about: sit down, build the use cases, figure out exactly what data you're going to give it when, and then once you put in the prompt,
yeah,
100%. I love it. Context engineering. Cooper, go for it.
I have a question for everybody versus just comments back to you guys. But has anybody used your AI agents and your LM to find new victims of a particular adversary internally, or found an adversary? I know we have, and I'm wondering if anybody's using this against live data today, and if there's just an anecdotal question. Does anybody else find any insights like new victims or new adversaries by using their data? Interesting.
I wonder, is that like a retrospective indicator of compromised search? Like you're essentially just feeding it an IOC and you're like,
if we're in the middle of doing something and we say some questions like, here's all the facts, here's all, go to look at your data and let me know if you have any more insights. And insights like, did you know that Joe Smith was also like, no, what made you say that, right? Like, because we may not have seen that. Or you go, hey, we're looking for this, and they go, actually, I think you're looking for this adversary based on these indicators. They're more likely. And looking at your edge and looking at what you stopped, and like, oh, new insight, let's pivot, right? So, is anybody using their AI tools today to pull that data and manage it and having those insights, or it's just a question? It's interesting.
We've used it very similar to what Mike was mentioning early on. We've used it to parse like large amounts of logs, and through the prompting we've given it, we've said, hey, based on this, go to this source for IOCs if there's IP addresses, that kind of thing. Or we also will tell it to go and ingest stuff from the attack framework. So if we're looking for specific techniques that are coming out in through the logs, or a certain process that the attacker's going through, we've used it there, especially on the IR side. When you're dealing with you have a very short timeline to make sure you've contained an incident, but you have an organization that maybe has invested in log aggregation or SIM or what have you, but they do have a bunch of syslog servers with a lot of data. Being able to use that to kind of pump through all that data really quickly and have it contextualize that data with outside sources. I've used it for that. It's been fairly good.
Yeah, I'll add something we've found interesting is that the large language models are pretty good at finding different or new threat variants, right? I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with MITRE ATT&CK on here. It comes from the threat intel world. It's, unfortunately not as operational for people like detection engineers or people who have to craft signals, right? Because we get to the procedure level, it's either probably not that well documented yet, or we get quickly into the area of infinite permutations, right? But we try to find that middle ground of things that are useful to search in a large volume of data, right? But what we found is, you're an expert in this log source, you're an expert in this threat. Can you come up with these variations that are grounded in real evidence, right? And so that kind of helps you flesh out otherwise things that would end up being a blind spot, right? So that's been pretty useful.
So I used your talk to your peers conversation, Dylan, we just did it, and what I just heard was you need lots of data, which goes back to Michael's conversation that if you don't gather it, you can't use it. So it's starting to resonate here. What success looks like if you're going to use an LLM or an agentic AI. So,
for what it's worth, my 2 cents on the MITRE ATT&CK part is, if you want to go from a log to a MITRE ATT&CK, like that kind of enrichment, I don't think you should use this classification problem in an LLM, because we had this in one of the talks of Black Hat, where we kind of ran a bunch of LLMs next to each other at this classification problem, and everyone had random answers. Because MITRE ATT&CK techniques and tactics are already so hard to differentiate, and these models are kind of very, very confident. They're not consistent. Even the same LLM, you would call it from the API another time, and it would give you a completely different answer. So we did 10 calls, and then we average the answers, and it would still be very, very random. And what we saw was you can just ask the LLM to build you a machine learning classification model code, in Python or something, and that would be a lot more consistent, even if it's not better, but obviously it's a lot better because anything is better than random. It would be a lot more reliable and easier to deploy. As Mike was saying, the dollars are a problem, and Ahmed was saying the deployment of big LLMs is usually a problem. You can use the LLM to make machine learning models that are specialized for specific use cases, and very basic machine learning will take you very, very far. But yeah, obviously LLMs are really good at generation, and obviously really good at generating these kind of codes and generating these kind of queries. And that kind of takes us over to the next point, I guess, from how do we get the right use cases and how do we get the right, I guess, things to work on? For instance, do we need method attack for everything, or do we need some other challenges in the data quality to focus on to bridge these gaps? Maybe Ahmed, you can share some insights around what's the biggest, I guess, learning that you got from making IT SecOps and OT SecOps work together. Like, how do you bring these teams together to develop these kind of use cases where they ideally want something that could be automated or with machine learning or with AI, maybe enabled to a higher efficiency?
I believe this is still a challenge, even that some facilities have deployed the OT AI anomaly detection. However, the SOC, the security ops, are still depending on the decisions of that solution rather than developing a threat case based on the expertise of the OT people, as well as combining them with the vendors' expertise, SOC expertise, and operation expertise. We're still doing baby steps in this, and I believe this is the field where we need to collaborate in this.
100%. When it comes to, I guess, the collaboration, do you see like any specific, I guess, methodologies that work better for these kind of things? I know Mike talked about maybe combining the SIM. Peter talked about maybe coming up with these correlation rules that correlate different data sources. Are these things that we should do but we're not doing, or are these things that have been done a while back? Like, what are the real problems and what are the real, I guess, operational issues when it comes to actually doing these kind of things?
Some of these solutions are already certified by the OEMs, and they will generate alerts based on their understanding of the protocol. However, we need to go beyond that. We need to sit with operations. Let's say I'm doing a Yokogawa VNet protocol, and majority of these solutions in the market now are certified by Yokogawa, for example, or Honeywell, or vice versa. We need to sit with operations, with the vendor himself, to understand what's considered normal, what's considered not normal, away from the protocol, from the operation point of view. Who should be doing this and who should be doing that? And this could be too specific for each facility, different from another facility, depending on the operation scenario on these facilities. So I think this should be handled on a case-by-case basis.
Do you see like some sort of I guess, workshop or some sort of like a roundtable style that works best for bringing
Definitely.
these stakeholders together?
Definitely, and maybe we if we can have a digital twin of the OT environment, that we can do some red teaming on them and test how the OT anomaly detection will detect them, how the SOC will detect them, and this will help us in defining the threat cases and streamlining them all the way from the OT floor, plant to floor, to the SOC team there.
100%. So I think it's more of like, I guess, consequence modeling. They gotta see the consequences. They gotta see like that kind of simulation first. Anybody here had, I guess, any kind of experience or insights into these kind of simulations or these kind of consequence modelings? And maybe any insights that you want to share on how do you actually do this in IT OT? I hear a lot of IT breach attack simulation tools that do great things in IT. I don't really hear it as often in OT. No one really wants to unleash a few, I guess, attacks on their OT environment. But as you mentioned, like there are ways around maybe like making a digital twin and not really messing with your real environment. Anybody has experience with these in their experiences or in their operational organizations today? Like Ahmed, do you have a digital twin that you kind of like run your tests on to bring people around the round table discussion when it comes to IT and OT SecOps? And has that resulted in better collaboration?
We do a threat case review, but this is a normal practice that we do with our operation team and with the SOC team, but we haven't done the practice since we have onboarded the OT anomaly detection solutions. These solutions come up with a lot of strength. uncovered a lot of blind spots. But they come with a lot of false alarms as well. So that's another homework need to be done.
100%. So it really touches a lot of different problems, and your advice is to kind of like just run it on terms of like a little bit of simulation exercises so that they see the issues with it.
Definitely.
And obviously without a digital twin, it might be really, really hard to pull off.
A digital twin, or maybe one time I had a panel discussion with professors from local universities here, and there was an idea to build a regional OT lab, let's say on the eastern side of Saudi Arabia, because majority of the industries are here. So
Right.
that researchers, universities, OEMs can collaborate, can do simulations, can do red teaming, purple teaming, blue teaming on these labs, because nobody will give you the permission to touch the operation. So this will require an investment, but this is something
100%.
really needed, and it will be beneficial.
100%. Do you think AI can help, I guess, show the consequences to people without actually running on a real lab or maybe on a digital twin? Like, do you think AI can generate an environment, kind of like I guess it would be more like a honey environment, like a honeypot? Could that be something that AI fits in?
Yeah, I know that some of the control systems can be emulated on a virtual environment, but I'm not
Right.
really sure if the attacks on the emulated systems are similar to the attacks on the real physical systems.
Because you got to make sure that people are really coming together and seeing it through. 100%. And that ties off, I guess, Peter's point around really bring them together and sit them down and make them build these use cases first. 100%. I guess one show of hands would be, have you ever seen maybe OT simulations that worked out that you were able to kind of like result, I guess, in better correlations or better detection logic? Anybody has seen like simulations that actually resulted in improved detection and correlation, specifically between IT and OT?
We run simulated attacks on OT in controlled environments where they know we're doing it, usually whenever the plant's shutting down for maintenance, and then use that data to feed it back in to make sure we are able to see the attack. But for the most part, on OT in general, I do not run any type of simulated attacks on OT ever. Too much at risk there for legacy equipment that may not handle it well. Just my 2 cents on that one.
100%.
Like what Tom mentioned is sometimes during a shutdown window, we utilize BAS breach simulation solutions to test some breaches and attacks but that scope is so much limited. You sometimes you mimic a system on one single server or one single workstation, and you target that BAS attack on it. That doesn't necessarily give you a good picture or representation of how the attack will impact your system. That will just trigger alerts. Definitely, we need to invest into the shutdown windows. We need to invest into building another lab. Shutdown windows sometimes is really hard because during a shutdown, we have a lot of shutdown items, maybe upgrades waiting for us to complete during that period. So we don't have the freedom even during the shutdown.
Very insightful. It seems like there's a lot of limitations in OT that are not in IT. Kate, what are your 2 cents?
Yeah, I think we learn a lot from simulating something and then moving that simulation to a controlled environment. Obviously, kind of how Tom mentioned, we're not doing a real environment, but like it's still a controlled, similar systems, actual hardware, mechanics happening. And the biggest difference is like the learning of how different the simulation was to the control environment. You kind of apply that mentally and say, well, it's going to be even more different in an actual environment than the controlled one. And I think we can learn stuff from it, but it's not ever something to be unleashed on that either.
100%. I think I've learned a lot. I've learned like we need to focus on the foundations of the use cases. To get there, we might really need to just run a few simulations and bring the people together and see it for themselves. I think there's a lot of good work that maybe like some sort of like a workshop or like a round table or like stuff that maybe like the ITS Village does. I know Kate has a big role of the ITS Village. They usually like bring little like toys that you can kind of like mess with, like the same exact protocols. Like you're still hacking like into Modbus protocols and whatnot, but then instead of actually like crashing like a big factory, you're crashing like a little toy factory kind of thing. And I think they're like these kind of exercises can help people build these correlation use cases that Peter was talking about, right? And once you have these correlation use cases, then you kind of figure out where AI fits in, where machine learning fits in, where rules fit in, and you kind of like try to segment AI into what it's really good at, which is like generation as much as possible. And the other thing is, I guess that I learned is try to kind of like keep AI guardrailed. I know Tom had a few pointers on that. As much as possible, try to give it like a plan. I know Dylan talked a lot about like some sort of like context engineering, as he called it. That was pretty cool. And I guess as Ahmed also said, like always bring the people together. It's always like bringing the people around the solutions. And as Mike said, I guess always ensure that you're not really jumping into the solution and then finding a problem. You're kind of first finding the problem and then fitting in the solution. And a lot of the problems that you have today in most OT environments are like really, really basic. Like most people don't even have the visibility they need. For instance, like network security monitoring. I wonder if there is in the future maybe more trust that could be given to these kind of models, but it seems like a lot of people like Cooper and George and P said juniors wouldn't really know the difference. They need a lot of training to know what they're looking at. And at the same time, the seniors don't really trust the machine learning AI as much. They just use it as probabilistic instead of yes or no. They get the probability number out of it, and then they use their best judgment on top of it. I wonder if anybody has, I guess, 2 cents to share on the future of these kind of technologies when it comes to trust. I know this was a very insightful panel, but a lot of us seem to think the trust is still not there, and it will never be there. Given the example with IPS, like IPS is so deterministic, it's literally rules and policies that we can write ourselves, and we still don't trust it enough. Where do you see, I guess, the future of trust with these kind of models as we're closing out?
Not as much. Well, I guess trust, but one thing we were talking just about simulations. I mean, what I'd really like to see is an AI where we can input very much like we do prompting today in ChatGPT, but being able to put the data about our environments into this AI. Tell it what kind of PLCs we have, what the environment looks like. Maybe input a network diagram and have it generate simulations that are not running physically in your environment, right? So we give it all the information it needs, very much like an LLM, but it's almost like a mini LLM of our environment. And then we basically say, hey, scattered spider, how effective would this be on my environment given what you know about it? And it will come back and say, 55% probability you're going to be in trouble, and here are your problem areas, right? I would like to see something like that in the future. I think would be very good in the OT side. Where it allows you to use, it's not necessarily just fake things or real information from your environment, but it doesn't force you to use to do testing. Or, I'm working with a large transportation organization right now, and they want to build a lab. And of course, their stuff is very, it's not like just basic PLCs. It's very specific to their industry. So the cost of standing something like that up, that's going to be, not just bells and whistles that they can show an executive and say, look how cool this is, something that actually has value. It's expensive, right? So if we could do it virtually through something like an AI, I think that would be really, really cool.
It's like the marriage of digital twins and AI, essentially.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think Ahmed kind of touched upon that a little, and maybe you have another 2 cents.
Yeah. generally speaking about AI, be it in cybersecurity again or operations, we always talk about human in the loop or human out of the loop. What do I see in the operational machine learning and operational AI assisted? They are advisory. Human is always in the loop. We give the operator and the process engineer an advice, and he go and implement it manually with his full acknowledgement into the DCS or SCADA. We should have the same thing into our OT cybersecurity, because again, we are not doing CIA, we are doing in OT, we are doing availability here. We don't want something human out of the loop to take action and cause availability outages. So that's my 2 cents.
100%. It's all about this inverted CIA triad. Anybody else has any 2 cents to add on the closing? I think that's a wrap. What an absolute pleasure and delight. I appreciate you guys. Very, very grateful. Thank you for sharing your time and your insights with me and the community. It has been wonderful. I appreciate you folks, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
for having us.
Have a good one.